It was one of those evenings where the world seemed like it was trying to keep you in a moment of peace, even though everything inside felt like it was breaking apart. The setting sun poured through the tall windows of my study, spilling gold and amber light across the room. I had always liked this time of day. It felt like the world was still for a second, as if nothing could go wrong. But I sat there, staring at the picture frame on my desk, and everything that used to feel right felt so far away. The photo was from our wedding day. Ilara, standing there in her dress, looking so goddamn perfect, glowing like the whole universe was ours. And I thought it was. For the longest time, I thought we were a team. Her smile was everything. It was the smile that made me believe that no matter what happened, we'd be okay. That's how it felt, anyway. Now, it just pissed me off. It was like the universe had sent me a reminder of how naive I'd been, how blind I'd been to what was happening right under my nose. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood of my desk, trying to push away the tightness in my chest. Everything had changed, and yet nothing had felt more real than that moment of pure betrayal. I sat there for a long while, trying to focus on something, anything, but my mind kept drifting back to Ilara. She wasn't who she was supposed to be anymore, and I didn't know why it had taken me this long to really see it. Her late nights, the coldness between us, the way she'd shut me out. I tried to ignore it at first, didn't want to make a fuss, didn't want to jump to conclusions. But the truth was, I had seen the signs. Hell, I'd been seeing them for months. And I'd been stupid enough to believe the lies she fed me when I asked. "Oh, it's just work," she'd say. "I'm tired, that's all," she'd claim. Like I was too dumb to notice she wasn't even looking at me when she said it. It felt like she wasn't even trying to keep up the act anymore. So, after months of just sitting there, feeling like I was losing my mind, I did the one thing I never thought I'd do. I set up the damn camera. I tried to tell myself it was just a precaution, that it was nothing serious. I wasn't really spying on her. But we both knew I was. I clicked open the camera feed, not even sure what I was expecting. Maybe some kind of clue, something I could use to make sense of it all. For the last 2 weeks, the camera had been useless. Just empty shots of the living room. I thought, maybe if I kept watching long enough, something would make sense. I thought that maybe if I could catch her in a lie, I'd finally feel like I had something to go on. But that night, as I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for nothing to happen as usual, something did happen. I froze. A figure stepped into view. Not Ilara. No, this man was tall, with dark hair, messy but not in that charming way, and a look on his face that I couldn't quite place. But what struck me first was how at ease he was in my house. He moved like he belonged there. I sat there, watching the screen, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to believe it, but I already knew. Ilara stepped into the frame, smiling, her arms going around the stranger's neck in an intimate way. A hug, but not just any hug. This was the kind of hug that told a story all on its own. The kind of hug that meant things were far worse than I'd ever imagined. My body went cold. Every part of me wanted to scream, to yell at her right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the feed. I felt the fury start to rise, but it wasn't like I thought it would be. It wasn't a hot rush, but a slow, cold burn, creeping into every inch of my body, until it felt like ice was running through my veins instead of blood. I told myself I'd confront her. I told myself I'd go downstairs, face her, demand she explain. But I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't be enough. Not anymore. I had watched the lies pile up in front of me for too long. I'd let her play me for a fool long enough. No, this wasn't going to be some emotional outburst. This was going to be something far worse. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without paying for it. I shut the laptop, the room suddenly feeling way too small. Part of me wanted to burn everything down. Her lies, her betrayal, everything that had made this marriage a joke. But I didn't want to just destroy it all. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling. Every damn second of it. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. But that was for later. Right now, I had to figure out what came next. The next morning, I barely slept. I didn't want to. I didn't want the comfort of closing my eyes and pretending that I hadn't just seen my wife in the arms of another man, in the place where I was supposed to feel safest. I didn't want to rest, Not until I figured out how to make her feel every bit of what I was going through. Ilara came downstairs as usual, acting like nothing had changed. She didn't know I knew. At least, not yet. The way she kissed me on the cheek, barely even looking me in the eyes, sent a chill down my spine. She didn't care. Or if she did, she was pretending it didn't matter. She went about her morning routine, making coffee, humming some song I didn't recognize. She was acting like the woman I used to know, but it wasn't her. It wasn't even close. I ate my breakfast in silence, watching her every move. She made it look so effortless, like everything was fine. But I could see the cracks now, little things that I'd ignored for so long. She was more distant than ever. She didn't ask how I slept, didn't offer any kind of conversation. It was like she didn't even care about me anymore. That thought hit harder than anything. I couldn't even remember the last time she had looked at me with warmth, with anything that felt like love. I stood up and grabbed my coat, pretending to head out for work, but my mind was miles away. My chest was still tight from last night, from what I'd seen, from what I knew. But I couldn't confront her yet. Not in a way that would make it all feel too real too fast. I needed to get myself together, to think through the next steps. I couldn't let emotions dictate my moves. Ilara was playing a game, and I was done being the pawn. I drove around for a while, giving myself time to breathe, time to put the pieces together. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about her affair. This was about the years I had wasted believing in someone who never really believed in me. This was about everything she had taken without ever looking back, all the while pretending that I was the one in the wrong. That's when it clicked. I had a plan. A slow burn. A way to make sure she'd feel the same heartbreak I was drowning in. First thing, I needed to hit her where it hurt the most. Her career. Ilara had worked so damn hard to get where she was. She was always talking about how important her job was to her, how her reputation in the art world was everything. And I had always supported her, even when it felt like she was more focused on her gallery shows than she was on us. But now, I saw it for what it really was. Her job was a crutch, something to distract her from the reality of our marriage. It had always been easier to lose herself in it than to face the cracks in our relationship. So, I made a call. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to ruin her life just to get back at her. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew that if I didn't make her feel the consequences of what she'd done, I'd never be able to live with myself. The people I knew, the connections I had, they could make her fall from grace. Just like that. And I'd make sure it happened slowly. She'd watch every opportunity she had slipped through her fingers. I'd make sure that every gallery that had ever considered her for a show would be out of the picture. I'd ruin her career like she'd ruined my life. I was good at this, at keeping my emotions hidden, at making decisions without letting anyone see the rage bubbling under the surface. And this time, I wasn't going to be some lovesick idiot begging for an apology. I was going to make her pay. When I got home, Ilara was already in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in, just murmured a half-hearted hey, like it didn't even matter. I wanted to slap her, or scream at her. But instead, I just nodded and went upstairs to my study. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Part of me still wanted to go to her, to beg her to stop, to fix this. But I knew better. This wasn't something that could be fixed. Not now. Not after everything she'd taken from me. The rage was still there, simmering under the surface, but now it had direction. Now, I had a way to make sure Ilara would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. And I would be there, watching it all fall apart. But that wasn't all. No, the worst was yet to come. I had to make her see how much nothing was left for her after the lies were stripped away. After the people she thought would stand by her turned their backs. I had the plan, and it was going to work. There was no turning back now. The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions, kept my head down, but inside, I was calculating every move. I had to stay cold, detached, focused. The first strike had to land perfectly, like the first cut of a surgeon's knife. Clean, precise, and devastating. I couldn't afford to mess this up. I had a meeting with one of the gallery owners I knew, an old friend of mine from my college days. We'd lost touch over the years, but I knew the guy well enough to get his ear when I needed it. I kept the tone casual at first, asked him how things were going, how the gallery was holding up in the current market. He gave me the typical response. Things were fine, nothing crazy. That's when I slid in the question. I'd heard some rumors, I told him. About Ilara. Her reputation, her behavior, the way she'd been unprofessional with a few clients. I didn't go into specifics. Didn't need to. Just enough to plant the seed. The rest would take care of itself. Within hours, word had spread. I didn't care what they believed. I just knew that the damage would be done. The gallery owner called me back a few days later to thank me for the heads up. He said he'd keep an eye on her, but I could tell from his tone that his mind was already made up. It wasn't just about one accusation, it was about the perception. And I had made sure that perception would be enough to make her career start crumbling. I didn't see her reaction right away. She was still going to work, still doing her thing, but every time she came home, I could see the tension in her face, the way she was looking at her phone more and more, the frown lines deepening. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. What surprised me was the next day, when I found a letter from the gallery in the mail. It was addressed to Ilara, but I opened it anyway. It was a formal cancellation of her next big show. It wasn't just any show. It was the one that could have secured her spot in the art world for good. A huge step up in her career. The letter was polite, but the meaning was clear. Due to recent circumstances, they had to cancel. They were rethinking their partnerships with her. I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. At least not at first. I just felt numb. But when Ilara came home that evening and saw the letter, I saw the color drain from her face. She didn't know I was watching. I was just sitting on the couch, pretending to read a book. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. I watched her face, the confusion turning into shock. And then, finally, anger. She muttered something under her breath, something about assholes and jealousy, but I could see the way her hands shook. She knew. Deep down, she knew who had pulled the strings. She stormed into the kitchen and started making herself a drink. I could hear the glass clink as she poured. I wasn't in a hurry to talk to her. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I just sat there, calm, pretending I didn't care. I waited. Finally, she came back into the room. The air was thick with tension, but she didn't look at me at first. Instead, she flung the letter onto the table, like she was hoping I'd be as shocked as she was. "Do you have any idea what this means?" she snapped. Her voice was trembling, but I wasn't going to let her pull me into the drama. I looked at her, and for a second, I saw that familiar, desperate look in her eyes. The one that said she knew what was coming but couldn't quite accept it. "I know exactly what it means," I said, my voice steady, even though I felt like I could have ripped everything apart in that moment. "You're not going to get any sympathy from me." Ilara's lips pressed into a tight line, and I saw the anger build. "This is your fault, you know? This is what you do to me when I'm just trying to work. You sabotage everything. Declan. You always do this." I didn't flinch. I didn't sabotage anything. I just let the truth come out. "You've been lying for months, Ilara. And I'm not going to sit here while you pretend that this," I waved my hand toward the letter, "is just some coincidence." Her face turned red. I could see the deflection start. She wasn't going to face what had happened. Not now, not ever. Instead, she tried to twist it, like she always did, make it seem like I was the problem. She always did that. Always turned the mirror around on me, no matter what I'd caught her doing. "You always think the worst of me, don't you?" she shot back, her voice rising. "You never trusted me, Declan. This is just more of your control." I stood up, letting out a quiet laugh that sounded almost foreign to me. "Control? This isn't about control. It's about you taking everything I built and shoving it down the drain because you couldn't keep it in your pants." She didn't know what to say to that. She just stood there, her chest rising and falling, trying to keep it together, but I could see it. She was breaking. The image of that man in my living room, of her arms wrapped around him like he was the one who mattered, flickered in my mind. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice lowering. "This is just the beginning." I saw the fear flash in her eyes. The mask was cracking. And for a second, I let myself savor it. The moment I knew she finally understood what was coming. I didn't need to say anything more. I didn't have to. The next moves were already in motion, and soon, she would realize just how far this was going to go. How much I was willing to lose, just to make her feel what I felt. I didn't see it at first, but I could feel it. Something was shifting between us. Ilara was still trying to keep up appearances, still trying to act like everything was fine, but it wasn't. Not anymore. Her voice was tighter when she spoke, her movements more jerky, like she was trying to keep herself together, but the walls were closing in. And I couldn't look away. I had to keep my distance, keep my control, but it was harder than I thought. Every time she came near me, every time she opened her mouth to try and apologize or explain herself, it felt like my skin was crawling. She wasn't fooling me. I wasn't some idiot to be charmed back into the lie. She tried a few times to talk to me, but I just shut it down. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses anymore. I didn't want to know why she thought it was okay to betray me. I didn't need to hear her talk about how complicated it all was, or how it was a mistake. I'd heard those words too many times already. But that didn't stop her from trying. One night, after I came back from a meeting, she was sitting in the living room, waiting for me. The dim light from the lamp gave the room a strange, almost ghostly feeling, and she looked like she was bracing herself for something. Maybe for me to explode, maybe for me to leave. I couldn't tell, but there was that look in her eyes again, the one that told me she didn't want to be caught. "Declan, can we just talk?" she asked, her voice soft, like she was testing the waters. I barely looked at her as I dropped my bag on the floor and took off my coat. "We've talked enough," I said flatly, not wanting to get dragged into it. She shifted, clearly uncomfortable with my coldness. She always hated when I acted distant, when I didn't react the way she wanted me to. But that was the point now, wasn't it? I wasn't going to fall into the trap of begging her to fix this. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. "Please, just hear me out," she insisted, trying to make her voice sound reasonable, like she was the one in control. I'm not the person you think I am, okay? There's more to this than you know." I raised an eyebrow. "More? Like what? Is this going to be another one of your I was confused speeches? Or maybe a I needed space thing?" I knew what she was trying to do. She was softening me up, trying to get me to feel sorry for her. I wasn't having it. She flinched. I could see the frustration build in her, the edge of anger creeping in. "You're not listening to me. This isn't about you, or us, or some thing you think I did on purpose." Her voice cracked, but I didn't feel sorry. "Not anymore. I don't need you to explain yourself," I shot back. "I've been watching, Ilara. I've been seeing everything for what it really is." Her face went white at that. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but the words just died on her tongue. "You think I didn't know? That I didn't notice you shutting me out for months? That I didn't hear the lies every time you said, 'Nothing's wrong,' when everything was already falling apart? And don't even try to tell me it wasn't intentional." My hands clenched at my sides. "You've been playing me this whole time." She shook her head, looking like she was about to fall apart. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen, I swear. It's just," she stopped herself, eyes darting away from mine. "You wouldn't understand." "No, I do understand," I interrupted, taking a step closer. "You don't care enough to fix it. And now, everything is coming down around you, and you don't know what to do. Because it's too late for your sorries and your excuses." I felt my voice harden. "You've made your bed, Ilara. And now you'll lie in it." Her breath hitched, and for a second, I thought she was going to break down right there. Maybe she did care. Maybe she was feeling something. But I wasn't about to let that get to me. "I'm not going to make this easy for you," I said quietly. "I'm not going to play your games anymore. And don't think for one second I'm going to let you walk out of here with your hands clean." She bit her lip, clearly trying to keep herself together. "You think this is some kind of game?" Her voice was soft, but there was a sharpness to it now. The mask she wore was cracking, and she couldn't hide it anymore. "You think you can just punish me like this and I'm going to fall in line? You can't control me, Declan. I almost laughed. There was still some fight left in her, but I knew it wasn't going to be enough. It wasn't about control. It was about consequences. And she was about to learn that the hard way. I don't need to control you, I said coldly. I'm just going to watch you lose everything. The silence between us hung thick. She didn't respond. Not at first. I think she realized she couldn't win this conversation. The worst part for her was that she knew deep down that I had no intention of backing down. She was trapped. And as I turned and walked away, I heard her voice behind me. Quiet. Barely a whisper. Why are you doing this, Declan? Why can't you just forgive me? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I was done with forgiveness. I was done with her. The walls were closing in on Alara, and she had no idea just how far down this rabbit hole was going to go. But I wasn't going to let up. Not now. Not when I knew what I had planned next. The days after that conversation felt like a slow drip of tension, each moment stretching out longer than the last. Alara was walking around like she was stuck in some kind of fog, not knowing which way was up. I could see it on her face. The confusion, the fear, the panic. And I won't lie, part of me felt a sick satisfaction watching her squirm. But another part of me, the part one tried to bury, hated it. Hated that we had come to this. She tried a few more times to talk, always looking for some kind of entry point into my emotions, but I wasn't having it. She wasn't going to break me. I knew her too well now. I knew what she was doing. The fake vulnerability, the crocodile tears. She was trying to reframe the narrative, make me the bad guy for not understanding her situation, for being the one who couldn't let go. But I wasn't going to let her play me anymore. It was only a matter of time before the next piece of my plan fell into place. Alara hadn't figured it out yet, but I was already a step ahead of her. Her world was about to get a lot smaller. The first sign came a few days later when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I didn't even have to look at it to know who it was. Another one of her old friends, someone she had always been so close with, someone who I knew for a fact she had more than just friendly feelings for. His name was Greg, some guy from her gallery days who always seemed to show up right when things started to feel shaky between us. I never trusted him, even when I tried to act like I did. Something about the way he looked at her, always lingering a little too long, always just too nice. Alara had made it clear she didn't want me in her business anymore. She was always saying how trust was the most important thing, and how you can't control other people. I guess she never thought I'd find out that she had been texting him more than she let on, late-night messages. Funny how those things don't add up when you're not paying attention. So, I took the opportunity to send him a message myself. Just a simple one. Nothing crazy. Just enough to let him know where he stood. I told him that I wasn't interested in his friendly check-ins anymore and that if he knew what was good for him, he'd stay the hell away from my wife. I was calm, cold, but made sure my words hit where it hurt. Alara found out almost immediately. I could tell from the way she stormed into the living room, her eyes blazing with fury. "Why did you contact Greg?" she demanded, standing in front of me, hands planted firmly on her hips. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I didn't even flinch. "I didn't want to, but you've made it pretty clear that I'm not the one you need to be worried about," I said, leaning back in the chair, watching her with cold indifference. Her face twisted in disbelief. "So now you're stalking me? Spying on my messages? This is what you've become, Declan? This is what your so-called revenge looks like." "Don't act like you're the victim here," I shot back, standing up now. "I'm not spying. I'm just reminding people of their place. Maybe you should do the same." She clenched her fists, her eyes flashing with anger. But underneath that anger, I could see the crack. The moment of vulnerability she thought she could hide. She was losing control, and she knew it. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, voice shaking. "You can't just bully people into staying away. You can't just make everything your problem and expect everyone else to pay for it." I didn't do anything wrong. Her last words hit me like a slap. She still couldn't admit it. She still thought she was entitled to her lies. To the man in our house, to the countless betrayals, and now to me, standing here, acting like she was the one who deserved sympathy. "I'm not bullying anyone, Alara. I'm just giving people a little reminder," I said, my voice low and steady. Maybe you should be the one who starts thinking about the people you hurt. I'm just trying to make sure that you can't hide from your mess anymore." Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. For a second, I thought she might break down again. But then she wiped her eyes, gave me a look that felt like she was trying to find something, anything to hold on to. But there was nothing left. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. And I let her go. I knew this was getting to her. It had to be. She could see the cracks in her life now, the way her lies were unraveling, how fast she was losing her grip on everything. And there was no way to stop it. No way to pretend anymore. That night, I stayed up late, running through the next steps of the plan in my mind. It had to keep moving forward. I couldn't stop now. Ilara had done enough damage to us, to me, to everything we had once built together. And it wasn't just about getting back at her, it was about making sure she learned a lesson she'd never forget. But there was something else, something I hadn't quite anticipated. I felt it when I lay in bed that night, the emptiness creeping in. I wasn't sure if it was the cold satisfaction of revenge or something else. Something deeper, darker, that was gnawing at me from the inside. And for a brief moment, just a brief moment, I wondered if there was any way to fix this mess without it consuming everything. But the answer was clear. There wasn't. Ilara had made her choices. And now, it was my turn to make mine. The walls were closing in on her. And I was the one holding the walls. It's funny how quickly everything can change. One minute, you're moving like a ghost through your own life, just doing the bare minimum to get by. And the next, you're standing at the edge of something you never thought you'd reach. Something irreversible. Ilara was on edge now. I could see it in everything she did. She was walking around like a person waiting for the ground to give way beneath them, but pretending like everything was still fine. Her behavior had gotten erratic. Her phone kept buzzing, always hidden when she thought I wasn't looking, always on silent when she thought I wouldn't hear. But I heard it. I saw it all. Every little lie, every desperate attempt to keep things together. And the best part? I wasn't even trying to catch her anymore. She was already caught. The day it all started to unravel, I didn't even plan it. It wasn't part of the scheme, not exactly. But it felt like the universe was finally delivering me a piece of what I deserved. I came home early from work, and as soon as I walked through the door, I could hear voices in the kitchen. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe one of her friends stopping by. She had people over occasionally, people she said were just work colleagues or old friends. But when I walked into the living room, there they were. Ilara was sitting at the kitchen table with Greg, the same guy I had warned off weeks ago. Only this time, there was no subtlety, no pretending. They were talking close, too close, their conversation too intimate for comfort. She was laughing, and her hand was resting on his arm, as if this was just another casual coffee between old friends. Like they were just two people who had nothing to hide. My chest tightened as I watched them for a moment, frozen in place. Ilara hadn't heard me come in, and neither had Greg. I didn't need to say anything at first. The sight of them was enough. It was like the final puzzle piece snapping into place, confirming every suspicion I'd been ignoring for months. Every single thing that didn't make sense now made perfect sense. Ilara was the first to notice me standing there. She froze, a deer caught in headlights, but instead of guilt, there was a flash of something else. Maybe irritation, maybe fear, but it wasn't the kind of reaction I was used to seeing from her. Not the "I'm sorry" or "this is a mistake" look. No, this was different. This was the look of someone caught but still trying to control the narrative. "Declan, what are you doing here?" Her voice had this cold edge to it now, like I was the one intruding, like I was the one in the wrong. It was a strange foreign tone, one that made my blood boil. I didn't even respond at first. I just walked into the kitchen, my eyes never leaving hers. I wasn't even looking at Greg. He wasn't the problem anymore. He was just the symptom. "You've really got some nerve," I said, my voice steady, but it carried a weight that she couldn't ignore. "You didn't even try to hide it this time, did you?" Ilara's face went pale. She stood up quickly, a sharp movement that said she was trying to maintain control. "Declan, it's not what you think." She started to say something, but the words felt hollow, empty. Like a script she was repeating in her head over and over, hoping that if she said them enough, I'd believe her. Greg, who'd been silent up until that point, finally cleared his throat. "Look man, this isn't what it seems." I cut him off before he could finish. "Don't even try to play that card, Greg. You knew exactly what this was. You knew what kind of person she was when you came into my house." I could feel my fists clenching at my sides, but I kept my cool. I wasn't going to let them see how badly it hurt. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Ilara was glaring at me now, hands on her hips. "You don't understand anything, do you? You've always been so obsessed with controlling everything that you couldn't see what was really going on. What was missing?" "Missing?" I said, my voice thick with disbelief. "You mean me, Ilara? You were missing me? Is that the story you're telling yourself now?" She opened her mouth to respond, but then closed it, looking down at the floor. There was no answer, because there was no good one. Greg shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing this wasn't going to go the way he thought it would. He glanced at Ilara, as if waiting for some kind of signal, but she didn't give it. She just stood there, caught between us like a deer stuck in the headlights, her mask slipping faster than she could fix it. "I'm not the problem here," I said, my voice growing colder with each word. "You made your choice. You've been making it for months. I'm done being the fool. You think I didn't notice everything? The late nights, the lies, the way you acted like I was invisible? This isn't just some mistake. This is who you've become." Ilara's shoulders sagged, but she still didn't apologize. She didn't even try. There was no remorse, no real regret. It was just empty. And that was worse. Far worse. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "I should have left you a long time ago. But I'm not going to be that guy. I'm not going to beg. And I'm not going to fix what's already broken. You're going to fix this yourself." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I was done listening to her. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving them both standing there in the kitchen. I didn't need to say anything more. I didn't need to fix it anymore. There was nothing left to save. Ilara was broken, and I had no intention of picking up the pieces. The game was over, and it was time for her to face the reality of everything she had destroyed. The only question left was whether she could live with the wreckage she'd made of her life. The days after the kitchen confrontation felt like an endless spiral. I tried to keep my distance, kept my emotions buried, but the tension in the house was suffocating. Ilara and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was just the bare minimum. We were like two strangers sharing a space, avoiding each other's gaze, speaking in clipped sentences, never touching, never acknowledging the wreckage we'd become. But what struck me the most wasn't the cold silence between us. It was the way she seemed to unravel, little by little, each day. It was like I'd opened a door she couldn't close again, and now she was watching everything she cared about fall apart. She started losing weight. I noticed it first when she wore one of her old dresses that had always fit perfectly. It hung off her now. Her skin was too pale, her eyes too wide. She was tired, physically, emotionally, spiritually. She couldn't hide it anymore. At first, I didn't care. I didn't feel sorry for her. But as the days wore on, I couldn't ignore it. Not completely. There were moments, fleeting moments, when I'd catch her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, as if she was waiting for something. For what, I had no idea. Maybe she was waiting for me to come crawling back. Maybe she was waiting for some miracle to make everything right again. But there was no miracle coming. Not for her. One night, after a particularly brutal silence between us, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. The tears were there again, but this time, I didn't feel anything. There was no anger, no rage. Just emptiness. "Declan," her voice cracked, and I saw her wipe away another tear. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for everything to go this way." I just stood there, watching her. The apology was hollow. It was too little, too late. She was apologizing for everything. For the affair, for the lies, for the way she'd used me as a pawn in her own mess. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. You should have thought of that before, I said quietly, my voice steady but laced with something darker. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into feeling sorry for her. She didn't get to do that. She looked up, eyes red and swollen, but the defiance was still there. She wasn't giving up without one last attempt to pull at my heartstrings. I made a mistake, Declan. A huge one. But I've been trying to fix it. For months. I don't know how to fix it now, but I'll do anything. I'll make it right. Please, just give me another chance. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just stood there, watching her. The woman I had loved for years. This fragile broken shell who had destroyed everything we had with a few careless decisions. But it wasn't just the affair anymore. It wasn't even the lies. It was the way she treated me in the last year. Like I was an afterthought. Like I was the problem when all I had done was try to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. I'm not doing this anymore, Ilara, I said, my voice like ice. You're not going to get another chance. You've had your chances, and you've blown every single one of them. The silence that followed was deafening. She stared at me, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. But deep down she knew. She had to know. I'm done, I added, turning on my heel, my words final. You made your bed. Now lie in it. She didn't say anything after that. She didn't even try to stop me as I walked out of the room. For the first time in months, I didn't feel a thing. No anger. No resentment. Just nothing. But that night, something else happened. Something I wasn't prepared for. I stayed out late. Longer than I expected. I went to a bar. Just sat there, nursing a drink, watching the people around me, thinking about how far my life had come from the days when everything felt simple. Ilara and I used to go to places like that, together, and everything felt normal. We'd laugh and talk, and it felt like we had the world at our feet. Now, all I had was the echo of her laughter in my mind, and the empty glass in front of me. As I was leaving the bar, I bumped into someone. A woman. Her name was Claire. I didn't know her, but we exchanged a few words. Small talk at first, nothing deep. But something about her felt different. It wasn't the flirtation, though I could feel that in the air. It was the way she looked at me. Like she actually saw me. Like I wasn't just some invisible man carrying the weight of a broken marriage. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Not because of her, but because she reminded me that I wasn't a ghost. That I wasn't defined by the wreckage of my marriage. I told myself I wasn't ready for anything else. That I wasn't looking for another person to fix me. But when she smiled, something inside me shifted. It was like a door opening, just a crack, but enough to make me realize something important. I didn't have to be the person who was always hurt. I didn't have to carry that weight forever. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe I deserved something better. Something real. I didn't get her number. Didn't make a move. But as I left the bar and walked into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Like the chains that had been holding me in place, the ones Ilara had put on me without even realizing it, were finally breaking. The truth was, I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what the future looked like. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was coming. Because no matter what, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let myself be her victim anymore. Not again. And that was the beginning of something new. It's funny how life works. You think you've hit rock bottom, and then you realize you're just standing on the edge of something far deeper. The hardest part wasn't seeing Ilara's betrayal. No, that came later, after the storm had settled, after the anger had worn off and left me with nothing but the cold, hollow feeling of a life that no longer felt like mine. The hardest part was facing the fact that I wasn't who I thought I was anymore. I wasn't the guy who would stand by, silently suffering, while everything fell apart around me. And I wasn't the guy who'd keep fighting for a marriage that had already been destroyed. By the time Ilara came home that evening, I was already packed. My bags were sitting by the door, everything I needed in 2 duffel bags. I hadn't made a big scene, hadn't yelled, hadn't thrown anything. I'd already done the worst thing to her. I'd completely checked out. When she walked in, I could tell she wasn't expecting it. The way she stopped, her eyes darting around the room, as if she couldn't quite figure out what was happening. She saw the bags, the empty spaces in the closet where my stuff had been. Declan, her voice was softer than it had been in weeks, but I wasn't fooled. She was scared now. For the first time in months, she didn't know how to control the situation. I didn't respond at first. I just zipped up the last bag, not looking at her. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't thumping in my chest like it had been before. It was almost like I was detached from it all, like this wasn't the life I had been living, like none of it had ever mattered. "Ilara, we're done," I finally said, my voice steady, calm. Too calm. "I'm done pretending that we can fix this, that we can go back to what we were. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Her face shifted, the mask of defiance quickly falling away, replaced by something raw, something desperate. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this. I was wrong, Declan. I'll fix everything. Just don't leave. You don't have to leave. We can work this out. We can fix it, I swear." But it was too late. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the cracks, the fractures in the facade. I saw the woman who had once made me believe in love, in forever, now just a shadow of herself, scrambling to hold on to something that had already slipped through her fingers. I had tried so hard to hold on to us, to make things work, but she'd already pulled the thread that unraveled everything. "You had your chance, Ilara. Over and over again. But you chose him. And you've been choosing him. Choosing your lies, every single day since." Her lip trembled. She took a step forward, but I stepped back. I didn't want her near me anymore. "You're my husband, Declan. You're the one I'm supposed to be with. Please don't leave me alone with this. Don't leave me like this." I swallowed hard, fighting the knot in my throat. I didn't want to leave her broken, but I couldn't stay with the woman who had broken me, either. I took one last look around the house we'd once shared, the place that had once felt like home. The pictures, the memories, the things I used to love. They didn't matter anymore. They were just things. And I wasn't going to keep dragging myself through the wreckage of something that had been dead long before I'd gotten the courage to admit it. "Goodbye, Ilara," I said, voice low. "I hope you find what you're looking for. But I'm done being part of your lies." I grabbed my bags, and without another word, I walked out the door. I didn't look back. Not even once. And as I drove away, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying finally lifted. I didn't know what was next. I didn't know what the future held, or if I'd ever truly heal from what had happened. But I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer living in the shadow of her betrayal. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. And that was enough. Epilogue. A new beginning. Months passed. The pain dulled. I won't say it ever fully went away, but it became manageable, something I could live with. I focused on myself for once, on getting my life back, on finding out who I was when I wasn't defined by the woman who had broken me. I started going to the gym again. I took up painting, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with friends I had pushed away during the marriage. And slowly, I started to realize that I wasn't the same man who had walked away from that house. And then, one day, I bumped into Claire again. We talked more this time, not just small talk, but real conversation. It felt different. It wasn't about filling the hole left by Ilara, but about two people connecting on their own terms, without the baggage of what had come before. She didn't fix me. She didn't try to. But for the first time I felt like I could maybe, just maybe, be happy again. I wasn't looking for a rebound. I wasn't looking for anyone to make things right. I was just living. And for the first time in years, that felt enough. And maybe that's what it was all about in the end. Finding the strength to pick up the pieces of a broken heart, and realizing that even when it feels like it's all over, there's still something beautiful waiting on the other side. Because life doesn't wait for you to heal. It just keeps going. And you have to decide if you're going to keep going with it. I did. And I finally felt like I was starting to live again.